Hi everyone, and welcome to Admissions Live, the weekly web show for college admissions professionals. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live Network, a product of ED Universe Media. Tune in to Admissions Live on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on higheredlive.com and join in the conversation on Twitter using the Admissions Live hashtag. I'm your host, Nicole Lentine, and I am joined tonight by Ashley Gunn, admissions counselor at the University of Vermont, right up the road from where I am right now, actually. And in just a moment, we'll be chatting about non-cognitive skill and value measurement and application file reading. But we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Admissions Live possible. Admissions Live is made possible by mStoner, a marketing communications agency focused on higher education web strategy and development since 2001. Next month, mStoner is presenting a 3-part web analytics webinar series. You know the data you're collecting is important, but how do you put it to use? How do you align this data with institutional objectives? And how do you take advantage of Google's advanced features like customized reporting, event clicks, or funnels? You'll get answers to these questions and sharpen your knowledge of Google Analytics with mStoner's webinar series. We are tweeting out a link now where you can learn more about the series and register. Institutions can register for individual webinars or receive a discount by signing up for all 3. Admissions Live is sponsored by Zinch, a service of Chegg that helps colleges and universities save time and money while connecting them with best fit students during their college search. Zinch partners save up to 90% of the recruitment costs associated with generating a single enrollment for their institution while putting students first in their recruitment outreach. Email outreach@zinch.com or tweet @socialadmission to get in touch with your institution's dedicated Zinch representative today. Admissions Live is sponsored by Welcome to College, where college visits are made simple. The mission at Welcome to College is to help students find colleges where they will flourish. The team at Welcome to College believes it's all in the visit and have created free web and mobile applications to plan, rate, share, and compare the entire college visit process. Check out the new partners page at welcometocollege.com today. All right, so we were very excited to get going with this show. We had a little bit of a technical delay, but thank you for bearing with us. I have on the show tonight Ashley Gunn from University of Vermont, as I mentioned, right up the road from Champlain College, where I work. So, Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your kind of past in admissions and where you are today?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Ashley, and I work at the University of Vermont. And I finished grad school here at the University of Vermont. I studied higher education and student affairs, originally from Florida. And while I was in grad school, I did some internships. I also did an internship at St. Michael's College Office of Admissions, and I've been working here since June. And so just started working directly in the office, and I'm very excited about it. I manage the territories of Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey and work with some of our partnership schools and their on-campus programs.
All right, excellent. And you mentioned to me that you actually have a little bit of history with this topic. Did you want to briefly mention that too?
Yeah, so I've done just my own personal research and some research for class projects on non-cognitive skills. I was doing, actually worked at Champlain College for a little bit with some of their students that they bring from Philadelphia, doing some retention and success work. So I was really interested in looking at academic help seeking and academic motivation and how students use those skills to be successful. So I wanted to start with the admissions process because I have a strong interest in a career in admissions and enrollment management. And so looking at sort of, you know, is it the institution's role to help those skills or develop those skills in students, or can we find a way to find at least like some level of that in students when they're applying who show really great potential for succeeding but may not come out the best in their SAT scores or their high school GPA, but really kind of display a lot of the skills that we find allow students to be successful. So yeah, I was very interested in the student success piece. Admissions can sometimes seem disjointed from the rest of the campus in terms of campus services, and so what is our role in ensuring that we're bringing in a class that will be successful at the institution?
Excellent. Well, I'm excited with your history with everything, and you seem very clearly passionate about it, so it's great to have you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Well, to kind of put a framework to what we're talking about too, do you want to just talk about a little bit of the application reading process as it stands now, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about the non-cognitive piece specifically and how it factors into admissions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know here at UVM we do a holistic process, so we are looking at each piece of the application when we're looking at an applicant. And just in terms of, we definitely look at the SAT scores and high school GPA because they tend to be a really good predictor of at least that first year GPA. So that's definitely a piece that we look at. And then there are other things that really make a student successful at any institution that you can see in a recommendation letter, in their past involvement, as well as their essay. So demonstrating a passion for a particular topic or the ability and desire to get engaged. So those, past behaviors tend to really predict future behaviors in an institution. So look at that in some ways, but again, you want to find a student that can do well academically at the institution. And at least now, some of the best predictors of that tend to be the SAT and the high school GPA.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
if you had to kind of rate out, I mean, we're talking specifically about non-cognitive, but if you had to put those in a scale of, if a school counselor or guidance counselor were to ask you what are the pieces that you look at the most heavily, which would you kind of point to first and foremost?
In terms of, I would look at the, well, it's hard to say. First and foremost, the number one, I definitely look at their trends in behavior. So it's sort of a combination of both. So, I'm looking at the grades, but I'm looking at trends, and that sometimes can depict sort of the non-cognitive. So is a student showing persistence by engaging in a subject which may be difficult for them, but they continue to pursue it and get better at it? Did they have a rough start, but got better over time? Does that give us some indication of how they seek out help, how they find resources to help them succeed, how determined they are, and their level of grit? So, for me, I'm definitely looking at some of that, or they're staying consistent, or they're picking up additional activities, but still finding a way to stay engaged and do well. So I think overall, a lot of what I look at could be, quantified, but at the same time, on the back of my head, I'm looking at how does this demonstrate that a student will be successful, and still looking at some of those non-cognitives like persistence and resilience and leadership that really translate into a student being successful in any institution.
That's great. I like that you're using the typical pieces that we're looking at anyways in the application, but really reading between the lines of kind of, like you said, the sort of habits and the kind of growth that's there. And you mentioned grit and persistence. Are there other qualities that you're trying to pull out of these different application pieces that you're looking at? I mean, those definitely stand out as two huge ones, but is there anything else you're trying to find in there?
Yeah, I think when you look at your campus and you think, okay, so the students that are doing well here and sort of who fits and what does that look like? So I would say we were really community oriented, and again, this will be my first time engaging in the application process here and the review process. But in the same way, I think in any institution you can look at, all right, let's say our students are very community oriented. Where has a student shown teamwork? Where has a student shown that they've been willing to work with others to solve an idea? Whether it's through a sport or a club or a leadership opportunity. So how are students really demonstrating that they have some of those skills? And that's something that we really value at our institution. So how does the student show that? And so that's not necessarily what we do at UVM, but I think it's a good way to pick out sort of what are students demonstrating as a part of our culture and our student culture, and how is the student showing that they have some of that. So if it's an institution that really values problem solving and critical thinking, and so how does the student really demonstrate that they've engaged in some really difficult and serious problem solving on an issue that they care about? And so I think those pieces tend to come out very clearly in either the essay, if you offer an interview, or just interacting with the student, really kind of hearing the themes and the stories they're telling, or if it's a community service as well, and some of the ideals of your campus community are giving back. And how does the student show that they have empathy and that they're willing to really kind of dedicate their time to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the cognitives they're really interesting. So it's sort of just like there are some standards, but it's also like how do you define what's a non-cognitive for your camp? Like how do you define what are some of the non-cognitives you're looking for, and what's most valuable? I think how you review an application determines what are your values as an institution. And so for some institutions, I think it does come down to we value the most academically successful students, and we found the best way that is shown is through SATs or high school GPA. But I think that there are other ways students show some of those core elements of what makes the student successful. And so, how does your application review process reflect your values as an institution?
That's fantastic. I definitely agree, and I'm intrigued. You're bringing up these great points of every institution. Their values are going to be different. If an institution is looking more at ways to identify these traits in students that go beyond these numbers, what's your suggestion to an institution that really wants to do this? I mean, should they look at historical data? Should they talk to students specifically? What would you advise to an institution that really wants to make a concerted effort to make more of a look at this during the application reading process?
Yeah, I think it's finding students who have been really successful, and sometimes I think engaging in a non-cognitive process can be really cumbersome, so maybe you focus on specific populations where you're having a hard time. So, whether it be low-income students or students of color or students who have sort of like a marginal GPA, like really focusing on those students and saying, okay, well, the students that have been successful, what are some common traits that they demonstrated? Was it that they got involved really early on? Was it that they were willing to kind of go out and meet people and engage? And sort of seeing if you can find some nuggets of that in the process. So again, the persistence piece really comes out a lot. And Angela Duckworth has done a lot of work on grit, and she's come up with grit skills and really talked about how grit really is a big determiner of success, academically and personally and professionally. And it's just that ability to not give up. It's the fire in your belly. And so if you're in a really difficult environment, it's the ability to keep pushing and do whatever it takes to succeed. So I think it really helps. There are some really good models out there. I think Eastern Washington University has done they do like the Insight resume. So instead of an essay, they're sort of asking questions where you tell stories about where you demonstrated grit or creativity or leadership or teamwork. And so they've, highlighted sort of what their values are and are asking students to demonstrate in their past, activities or whatever they've done, how they actually demonstrated those. So I think that there are some emerging ideas and examples and scholars who are trying to do that with varying levels of success. But again, it always comes back to like, what are your goals as an institution? Who are the students that you're really trying to focus on retaining? And how do you find the key factors of success for that student group?
Absolutely. And if I was looking this way, I'm tweeting out those links as we speak so that the viewers can kind of refer to some of those articles, because it is really interesting, and it's great to try to find better ways to kind of find these traits of successful students in your institution and keep bringing them in. I know my institution ourselves, we're trying to see the traits that come through in our own students. We've realized passion is a huge one for our own students, and so we're trying to find better ways, whether it's through interviews or portfolios or other pieces, to find that piece of passion. So I'm really excited to start using those more in our reading application season. Is there anything new that you guys have started to find in your own students that you are looking forward to looking into students this particular year?
I can't say that we're, if you look at our new materials, we talk about moving mountains, and I think that's something that it's not new, it's just been a part of our culture and our institution for a while now. Students who are very, again, passionate, but, pick an idea that they love and find a way to make it bigger than themselves. Like, they really get the resources here to make that idea really large. So, we've just banned plastic water bottles on campus. That's an example of students really moving mountains of working towards a goal that they believe in. And there are students, I think, that are in our applicant pool, as I'm sure anyone can see, where you get those superstar essays and superstar applications of of students who are just already doing really amazing things, or they have something that they're really passionate about. And you know on your campus you have an academic unit or a club. Even in your community you have organizations that would really allow that student to take that idea and really make it larger than just an idea. So it's finding those students who, I think we've got a lot of really great resources for those types of students who are really passionate and have big ideas and are wanting to take what we have to offer and, you know, go beyond what they've always been able to do. So I think that's something that we're seeing, or just like, you know, the terminology that we're using and the kind of way that we're looking at it. What makes us unique in sort of this whole sea of institutions, you know, who are the students that are going to really, you know, do well here and kind of take off.
That's fantastic. When you see that trait in a student, you know, when you're working through them through the application process, are you finding that you're connecting them with those resources early, or are you just kind of more sharing those resources with them and kind of seeing if they take it and run with it?
Yeah, you know, and it's, you know, I've just started traveling and engaging with some students, and you know, something will come up, you know, whether it's a student who's like, I really love horses, and you know, this has been a really great, you know, an activity that I've done. Can I continue to do this? Are there bigger ways that I can do this? And I think, yeah, we have a horse, you know, like student-run horse farm, or there's places where you can put your horses, and you know, thinking of like, yeah, connecting students to some of the opportunities that we have here, and really kind of seeing the lights go on for that student of, you know, when you're, you know, in high school, it's, you've got so much going on, but you're still kind of like under this sort of rule of your school and your parents and your families, and you know, it's not always an opportunity for you to like let your passions kind of fly. And then thinking of a college in that time when, okay, yeah, like this is something I really love, and of course there are other things I have to do, but I'm going to really get to engage in this in a really big way. So, and even for students that don't, you know, have passions outside of their academic interests, you know, hearing from students who are like, I really want to study business, but I also love art, you know, I love to draw, and thinking of, you know, the different co-ops we have here around art and the different like living and learning communities we have around art, just like the Burlington community, and thinking, wow, this is what's really going to flourish here. So, yeah, I think it's a really good way to connect if a student is a good fit for an institution, and it could be a tool for many institutions who are seeing students who really kind of, you know, haven't necessarily had the academic support to do well, and that their potential may not be reflected in their materials, but you just know that, okay, they're going to get connected to something here, and they're going to get engaged in a really different way. And how are they telling us that story, and how can we hear it, even if it's not a part of the SAT and, you know, high school GPA sort of traditional way of looking at students.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that that last comment kind of brings up an interesting point, because with the one thing with test scores and GPA is that it's measurable. You know, there's a standard by which you can measure it against others. So that's a big thing that I think is part of this discussion about non-cognitives, is how do you measure that student's ability? Right. How do you measure grit? You know, and so I know you don't have an exact answer, but do you have any suggestions as far as gauging that in a student and really being able to detect sort of level?
Great, yeah, and that's a really good question, and I don't know if I have a good answer for it, but you know, I think it's like a shift in the way that you look at students. I think our process now, even though we do look at each student independently, you know, it is somewhat competitive, and I think students do know that there could be many students that share similar qualities to them, and how do they stand out, and how do they make themselves really look like, you know, the best fit. And I think when you look at non-cognitives, it just really takes the process down to the individual student. When you're looking at, okay, the student is passionate in this, and this is what we've got, it's really hard to compare students with each other. And so it's not so much a measurement of, you know, the student has more of this, and they have more grit, and this other student has this much grit. It's more or less than they have it, and they're showing the potential for it, and, you know, how, you know, and they're the right fit in other ways. And I think non-cognitives really come into play when sometimes it is a marginal student, or, you know, a student that you're really trying to assess. This isn't a clear yes or no in terms of if they're going to do well. I think it can really help be the tipping point, because they're showing something that would give you confidence that they're going to do a good job there, the institution. So, yeah, that's the best I can think. It's hard. It's you want something measurable, especially when you're dealing with 10, 20, 30, 40,000 applications. Like, how do you whittle it down? And or if you're a very academically competitive school and everyone is amazing, like, there's just like no easy way to figure out who are the top people in a pool that's incredible. So, I think it's a difficult process. I don't know if there'll ever be a right way to do it, or an easy way.
I agree with you. It's true, but I think that's you said you weren't sure if it's a great answer, but I think that's the best answer possible about it. It's such a tough topic to really kind of make simple right now. But I actually I know that this particular topic was brought up on EM chat, the enrollment management chat, and I was looking through their archives, and they pointed out that if we had an easy way to measure non-cognitives, then our job as an admission counselor would be somewhat useless because
exactly.
if everything was measurable, what good are we really to be able to actually sit there and make that decision?
Yeah, and I think it's important, every institution's a little bit different, but not to be so segmented from the campus community, to really be getting out and talking to students and knowing what services are available, because it just gives you better insight into, the student's going to do well here, or no, this isn't the best fit. There's so many institutions in the country that, there are definitely opportunities for students in many places. So, but you just, as an admissions counselor, really have to stay connected to the institution that you're admitting people to, and it can really help you gauge what non-cognitive factors are the most useful for that particular campus.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You have to have your finger on the pulse of the institution, because otherwise you're trying to match a student with a place you don't understand.
Right, exactly. And that's, it's not great for either party.
Absolutely. It's an interesting point too. You're really bringing up some great things about how, you have to kind of go beyond those numbers to really kind of learn a little bit more about this student, and if they show this determination, resilience. But where do you think is the balance between also making sure that they do meet that academic standard? Where is that balance? What you know what I'm asking? What balance?
How are you going to make sure that they're going to do academically?
Exactly.
A really good question. And I don't know if there'll ever be a point when you can say either or. I think that the SAT and the high school GPA and other different factors have been as successful as they could be. And so I think that you kind of really do have to add them together. I really value those assessments. I didn't do particularly well at any of them, but I think that they show you some level of how a student's going to do. They give you an indication. They're not perfect science, and I think people just have to really be aware of not using them like that or relying too heavily on them. But, that's what we have right now to assess if a student is doing well, is going to do well at our institution academically. And if a student can demonstrate that in their high school academics and shows a commitment, and you kind of know the context, all things being the same, then I think that we can have a really good indication that the student will do well. And there are students that don't do well, but it's not like a whole swath of students who are just not doing well in high school who magically do well in college. There's definitely a few, and I think they can sometimes be worth the time to look into the situation. But I wouldn't throw out the SAT, and I wouldn't ignore the high school GPA. I think they're really important. College requires a whole array of different skills. You have to manage your time. You have to seek out help. You have to do so many different things that you didn't necessarily have to do in high school. And so I think that's where when we get surprised by a student who comes in with such stellar materials and then they don't do well, that's where we can start using those non-cognitives to say, what are we missing about this student's level for success and their potential? Because there are just a lot of really smart kids out there who can show up to a class and get an A, and then show up to college. It's just not the same. You just can't do that. So I think it can go both ways. It can help you with that part of your applicant pool that's kind of iffy, and then you've got those great students who are just shocking people with their level of just not doing as well as they thought. I think if you look back, you can kind of see, all right, they didn't really study. They didn't have any of those skills. They maybe didn't have to balance any extracurriculars. They didn't demonstrate any sort of level of persistence. So when they faced a challenge, they really crumbled really quickly. So I think it can really help you see, okay, a student just hasn't dealt with anything, equivalent to college. Are they going to be successful just because they can go to class and get a good grade?
That's a really great point. I was, I think at first thinking of framing it in the students who maybe are lower academic standards, but it does. It goes the absolute other way, too. You could have the 4.0 top SAT score students that the first time you criticize them in their class, they crumble under typical teacher criticism, and that's a really, really great point. And I think it probably is really valuable in the context of like retention too, without a doubt. I mean, if you can recognize these traits in the higher students and the lower students and just work towards bringing in a better class, it's, like you said, going to be the best fit for your institution, whichever.
Yeah, those students is like they're sort of shining stars. It really sucks when you lose them because they don't have the skills to succeed. So, it can, it's the whole part of like how is admissions connected to the rest of the university. We're not a retention office, but how do you at least set students up for success when you bring them in? And so sort of knowing and seeing that in students, if you have a rock star, making sure that there's some path for them to succeed in your institution.
That's a really great point. Do you have any particular stories that were particularly memorable about a student who, was that higher end or the lower end or something, and that really sticks in your mind when you come to this topic of these non-cognitive traits?
Yeah, well, I always think of myself, actually, and it's probably why I've got into this line of work. Because I was that stellar student that really didn't do well in college because I hadn't faced a lot of difficulty before. I was just a smart kid, so I didn't have to learn how to manage my own time, and there were just different things that I needed in order to be successful. I couldn't just be a smart kid anymore. So yeah, I went into college. I had like a 4.3 GPA. I had already done college credits. I was definitely that, and I barely squeaked through college with like a low B, high C average. And I always, I look back on that time in higher ed, and I think that's probably why I'm still in this profession and think, wow, I really wasted, I just didn't live up to the potential that I had. And it goes back to whose responsibility is it? Is it the students coming in, and also how does the institution sort of like grow that and allow the student to be successful? I think my institution was great. Shout out to the University of Florida. And so I think that they did a great job, but, it's how do you if you have a great student, how do you allow them to continue to excel? Like it's, you have some level of responsibility to the students you admit. And then also I think like I probably took a spot from a kid who looked like, crappy on paper, but could have done much more with their time at the university than I did. So, how do you really let those students come to the top and show that they have what it takes to be successful?
That's great. I love that you got to reflect back on yourself about that, too. And you're making me think about my own experience, too, because I think I definitely see a little of that in myself, too. I was a strong high school student, but then I came to my school, and I loved it, and I had a great experience, but I think I was lacking some of the traits that maybe other students that could have been in my position could have taken full advantage of the institution at the time. But I think that, maybe that's something to be said about admission counselors who choose to work for their institution that they went to as well, that they see these traits in other students that they saw flourish at the institution. They want to encourage that.
I do have a deep love for the University of Vermont, and I just want to see it grow. And a lot of that has to do with the student, the class that you bring in, and sort of, where they're going to take it. Just in the same way that you give something to the students in terms of connections and learning, like they definitely add something to the campus community and are the reason that your campus will go to the next level. So how do you find those students that are really not just the best fit, but really kind of make the university better because they were here?
Absolutely. I have a few students that actually I can think of that fit that exact kind of embodiment. In fact, this past year's incoming class, the ones that have been just a few weeks in, we had one student in particular that his academics were, nothing overly spectacular, but he made such an impression on so many admission counselors in our team that, we couldn't do anything but fight for him because he demonstrated these characteristics that we knew he'd be successful, even if he couldn't show it on paper, he'd be successful at our institution, and we just had to, give him that chance. So it's absolutely true.
Yeah, I think students who are given that opportunity know that they're being given a really great opportunity and want to live up to the high expectations you have for them and want to do well. And so, it really works out both ways. Like, that you really gave someone an opportunity that they may not have had at another institution, but also the student really gets to live up to do more than they ever thought they could and really give back to the people who stepped up for them.
Absolutely. So I'm sure, since I know we have a few school counselors that are tuning in tonight on the guidance side of things, and I'm sure they're wondering, if they know that they have these exceptional students who, may not look great on paper, or maybe look great on paper, but aren't, showing these qualities either way. But I'm thinking more specifically about the students who maybe they don't have the most stellar GPA, maybe they don't have the best test scores. What advice do you think the school counselor should give to the students as far as when they're making their outreach to the schools of their dreams? What should they do to be able to say, hey, I may have a 2.5, but these are the things about myself that would make me a great fit for your institution?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, one of the things I like about the graduate admissions process is that you're really required to say, like, this is why this school is the best fit for me. This is why this program is the best fit for me. And we don't always do that in the undergraduate admissions process, but I think of when you talk about what are successful students, what do they look like across the board, the common theme is that they're engaged in some way, and that demonstrated engagement, that ability to just get excited about the campus and their program or their club should come out. And so if a student if they've really done the research and they really know the institution really well, and they can say, like, you've got these programs, I want to be there. That's sometimes the tipping point between a student who's going to do well and really persist because they really want to be there, and a student who just happens to be there and could be great on paper but isn't going to do well. So I think for a student to really demonstrate that, to show that they have some interest they have like a really intense interest in the university, what the programs are, what the campus community is, if they've come to visit, if they've met with met with their admissions counselor for their area, if they've really kind of researched the university, know about the programs. So I think that really, those students, when they get here, like, they're so excited already. It's a really big factor. And so encouraging those students to reach out to the admissions counselor for that area, to go to campus and, to talk about that at some point in the application process. You can never tell if it will, tip the scales either way. It's always, you're always dealing with a large applicant pool, and it's not always, this is not like an easy science sort of to say, but at the same time, I think that when a student comes up to me, you see so many students who are just walking by your table, but when a student comes up and like, I love your school and I love this program that you have, and it makes you so excited because you're like, wow, when they get here, they're just going to have the best time. And everything's going to be exciting to them, and they're going to persist. That's really important.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's one of the best parts of being in admissions and getting to be at the institution long enough to see that student actually come to the school and continue to the school. You're making me think of this one particular student of mine who I met when I was all the way out in Colorado. I thought, oh, I'm not going to meet that many students out here that love our school or even know who we are. And the student approached me, said, I love your school, I want to be there, kept in touch with me, did an interview, was with me the whole way through the application process, took a gap year, still kept in touch, kept going through the process. Is a current student, went to this amazing program over the summer, is doing multiple studies. I mean, like, student,
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's so funny because, it's great. It is great when you recognize these traits in a student, and then you see them, like you said, bettering the institution by being a part of it. And I think that's really what it all comes around to with these traits that you're looking for in the student. And I'm glad that the conversation kind of keeps coming back to that, because that's really, I think, what it's all about is are these students going to make your institution a better place?
Yeah, yeah, and I think there are always like some hidden gems out there you have to really search for and kind of tell them about what you have to offer. And you can see it. You can just see it in their eyes. You can, feel it when you're talking to them. That just, you just know, like, I know this campus, and from what you're showing, like, it's just the best place for you. And so you just kind of want to see that like love match happen and have it be best for the institution and the student.
Absolutely. I think it comes back to that whole idea of, like we always talk about fit and fit, and this is really what fit is that match that is going to be the place where you can flourish and do great things at.
Right, yeah. And so like if your institution is like really small and close-knit, you can kind of look at some of the non-cognitives that a student would bring in, like teamwork and just sort of being able to meld in that environment. UVM's a larger school, it's a mid-sized school. But too, you've got to have a student who's willing to reach out and sort of, try new things and put themselves out there just in order to get engaged. And so, in order to feel that community. So you kind of being able to pick out some of those skills that can't really always be demonstrated or even demonstrated at all in your SAT or high school GPA, but really kind of come across whether it's in an essay or a recommendation letter or an in-person interaction.
Absolutely. I'm realizing we're already getting near the end of the hour, so I want to make sure I mention in this chat that if people who are listening have any questions for either of us or anything to contribute to the conversation, to use the Admissions Live hashtag. Somebody did kind of share this statement, Laura Birdsall shared, by considering non-cognitive skills in addition to SAT, GPA, etc., we can paint a more vivid picture of college applicants. I think that's a good way of putting it. Is I
always on the UVM staff, so she's awesome. Yeah. Go Laura.
I wasn't sure. I thought that name sounded familiar, but I wasn't quite sure. Well, that's fantastic. But it's always cool when I think like on top of when a director of admission or a dean of admission gets up there and tells an incoming class that on top of this is your average GPA, this is your average SAT, but in this group, you have these many students who have done this, and these many students who have accomplished this and donated this many hours to community service. I love hearing those kinds of things, and I think that just as much paints a picture of what the institution is really all about and what that incoming class is all about. And that gets back to these qualities in students that aren't measurable.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the exciting things. You don't remember people's grades, like you remember just how they made you feel and what they did. And so, I mean, it's sort of like, why not look for that in the application process? It's not always easy, especially, but why not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I cut you off there?
No.
I was going to say, I know I had a few questions too about, looking ahead in the future application reading seasons. I mean, we're a little bit ahead of this topic since we're traveling first before really getting into the nitty-gritty of reading. But, when teams go year to year, and I know you said you're relatively new to the UVM team, but do you know if your team as a whole or at other institutions you've been at, does the team kind of review the applications from prior years and discuss maybe new traits that have kind of come to the surface? I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, but is this kind of an ongoing process for institutions that you've seen, or do you think it should be to kind of keep looking back at the most recent classes specifically?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, again, I wouldn't know for the overall campus, but I work with our partnership schools, and we've got some new partnership schools that we're working with. And when we're thinking of just the students coming in, and more students coming in from these schools in different years, so we're looking at the students that came in, how successful were they and why were they successful? Is it because they got involved early on? Is it because they knew what their major was going to be right when they were applying, like they came in with a focused major? So we're getting these really small groups of students from like our schools in Philly and Chicago and the Bronx. So it gives us, it's a smaller pool with which to look at and say, like, who are the students that are really shining and fitting in, doing really well here, and what students are really struggling. so that when the next year when we are recruiting with those students or meeting with those students, kind of understanding, is the student really gonna make the most of their time at UVM? Do we have everything that they need to be successful here? Is this again the best fit? So I know that that's something that we have a partnership school in Philly, and it's something that I'll be looking at with those students, is kind of having an idea of the fit piece to it, and how and what non-cognitives that they are expressing in other parts of their application process would give an indication of, yeah, this is UVM is going to be the perfect place for them for the next 4, 5, 6 years. Yeah. Yeah, and we have like some good stories, and I know the students that come from partnership schools and how and why they've been successful, and being able to say, like, that's sort of what it takes, that level of engagement and excitement and determination and that love for this institution, for to come from wherever you're coming from. So how are students demonstrating that?
Awesome. And in the reading process, how do you express these things about a student? How do you pass that information on to whoever's making the larger decision, if it does go on to somebody else?
Yeah, so I mean, I read really thoroughly. I'll be reading really thoroughly, and I've done some practice ones, and writing notes. And sometimes guidance counselors will reach out to me, especially if it's a situation where there's a dip in a student's grade. And even on some visits, I've had guidance counselors say, I have a student, they're interested in this program. They didn't do well this one semester because of this or this one class. And just sort of talking them through it and having conversations about, the major choice, what happened, and trying to express that and looking for, almost everyone can have a sad story, but what about this major program? Is the student still interested despite their academic record? What level of commitment do they have to it, and how can I see that, and how is that demonstrated? So I think in those situations where a student really is on the borderline, being able to see that level of engagement and excitement, and being able to understand that, again, that level of grit, like they're still willing to work really hard, and they know what it takes, and they're doing their best to get there. So in some cases, the students, like, you hate to say no to someone, but there are times when you have to say, this is not the right fit, this is not the right fit program, this is not the right fit institution. You don't want to put a student in a situation where they're going to fail. But for, there are definitely some cases, and I imagine there will be, and just from some conversations with guidance counselors, of students who, had some rough luck or, had a rough semester, but are very, very passionate about either the institution or what they want to study.
I think it's so important, too, what you brought up about really having kind of an ally in that counselor that you get to work with and that you get to know, and that they can work with you on an honest level to call you and say, listen, this student is just not the right match for your institution. And I know I've had some of those relationships, too, of counselors that they'll never write it in the recommendation letter, obviously, but they'll take the time to reach out with a call and say, this is what you're seeing there, but this is what you need to know about the student that does or doesn't make them a good fit for your institution. And that is so important to be able to develop those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when you always talk about, like, the campus visit, but having students really come up and see it for themselves, talk to current students. We're giving them these guidebooks, and they're going to the website, and they're really not always the same thing. And I think students can feel it. In some cases, they can just feel when it's the right fit, and they can feel when it's not. And so being able to really have that experience, if they can, is very important.
Absolutely. I know we're nearing the end of our time, but I did have one more question, and I guess it kind of reflects back on what we've been talking about, but, how do you keep yourself on top of just always looking for this in students? And it seems very clear that you're very passionate about it, so it's easy for you to be able to kind of look at this a little bit more, but, maybe for the counselors who are out there that, when you're 2,000 or 3,000 applications deep,
right.
and you feel like you got GPAs coming out of your ears,
right. Yeah.
How do you keep yourself really, focusing on these, when you're going app to app to app to app? I mean, obviously you want to treat each student as an individual person, but sometimes it's hard when it's pieces of paper or, if it's on the screen in front of you and you've never gotten to meet that student. So what do you advise to us when we're out in, February reading through these apps?
Right. Well, so I had a really funny moment today where, like, I was counselor on duty, so I like was just answering phone calls and like responding to emails, and you sort of just like lose the fact that people are people. They just sort of become voicemail messages and emails, and all the questions seem the same, and it can get very like exhausting. And I was walking, across campus, and like there were two students carrying these grocery bags, and they ripped open, and other students came to like help them. And they were like, "Where's your, residence hall?" Like, "Oh, I'm going that way." Like, "Really, let me help you." And like, that's what I love about UVM. Like, I love seeing that, and you don't always see that everywhere. You don't see that level of community. And just from hearing which residence hall, I'm like, they're probably first year students, and they just feel this sense of community of these people they don't even know. Like, they could have really kept walking. And it sort of reminds me like why I love this institution. And the students that are applying, like, yeah, there's always students that are, you're their backup school, but there are some students where this is where they want to be. They want to do something here. And I think when those times when it is really kind of the super drudgery, like, gosh, this is another application, like, no, that's like a student who they've looked at this institution, they've fallen in love with something here, and they really want to be here for the next 4 years. And having them here is going to make our campus better, and it's going to bring us to a new level. And I think when you have that commitment to the university and understand its values and its goals, like, it just changes the dynamic of what you're doing. Anything can be drudgery. You could work at like Ben and Jerry's and it could be the worst job ever. So it's sort of like, how do you find a way to make it exciting every day? Like, what do you do to stay refreshed and connected to why you're doing what you're doing? I think for me, it's seeing the students and seeing them connecting and taking advantage of the opportunities here, and knowing that we're about to open the door for another group of students to do that. So
I don't think we could end on a better point than that.
Yeah, cool.
that really encapsulates it all. That's such a great story, and that's so true. I couldn't agree more. It's like, when you're just feeling like, oh my gosh, this is just another thing on the screen, another piece of paper. It's go back to your students and see how wonderful they are and how good they make your institution.
Yeah, totally. Walk around, connect with somebody, like a current student. I think it will definitely give you some perspective.
Awesome. Well, that is, like I said, a great way to end it. Did you have any other things to share about this topic, or things you wanted to pass on to folks who are thinking about this?
Yeah, no, I think the final thing would just be, again, recognizing the values of your institution, because there's always a lot of stuff that you can be looking for in a student, and just knowing your institution very well, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for joining me on the show tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it was such a great show. And yeah, so your Twitter handle is just at Ashley Gunn, right?
Yes, yeah, 2 N's in the gun.
Yes, 2 N's at the end. Awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you again for joining us, and hopefully people can tweet at you after the show if they have any questions. You had some really, really great links to share and really great research, so hopefully people will tap into you for doing that. And I wanted to share that while we're getting ready for next week's show, Ashley Hennigan, now Ashley Budd, is going to be rejoining the show. She is now a married woman, and she will be back on the show next week. But I will still be jumping in to guest host here and there, so keep an eye out for me. But I am off to do some travel season, so wish me luck there. But as always, you can watch more shows from Admissions Pros on the Admissions Live archive located at higheredlive.com. Thank you to everyone who tuned in live, and thank you again, Ashley, for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. All right, guys, see you next time.
Mm-hmm.